Ah, Jeffrey Epstein. That guy. You may have thought that associates of Jeffrey Epstein were limited to transatlantic business and political elites like Prince Andrew, Donald Trump, and Bill Gates. But if you thought it ended there, I'm sorry to say that you're sorely mistaken. Because much like Magellan's voyage, the Epstein scandal set off from the Atlantic, made its way past Brazil and around the southern tip of Chile, crossed the Pacific Ocean, and arrived in East Asia. But instead of meeting its untimely end in the Philippines, the Epstein scandal turned north, arriving in a distant land with seemingly no connection to one of the 21st century's most infamous figures. I'm saying the Epstein scandal has reached Japan. Despite the fact that the slow drip of the Epstein files release has turned American and to a certain extent European politics on its head in recent months, this Japanese figure's involvement with the infamous trafficker isn't exactly a new development. He's from Japan, but he made a name for himself as a venture capitalist in the United States. And while all of that essentially came crumbling down more than a half decade ago, due to his ties to Epstein, he somehow managed to put his career back together, and even thrive by returning to Japan where he was far less known but still influential, even going as far as landing multiple roles in academia and the government. So who is this guy? What was his relationship with Epstein? And how did he manage to get a second act in Japan, despite his very public downfall years ago? Joi Ito, known as Joi, was born in Kyoto, but he spent much of his childhood and early life moving back and forth between Japan and the United States on account of his parents' work. He had an interest and an aptitude for technology and soon became an entrepreneur and venture capitalist, investing in Kickstarter, Twitter, and Flickr, among many Silicon Valley and tech-adjacent companies. Ito also served on the board of a variety of tech nonprofits, including the Mozilla Foundation, the Open Source Initiative, and Creative Commons, which he led for a time. In 2011, Ito was chosen to become the director of the MIT Media Lab, a research center at the prestigious university known for pioneering a range of inventions, including the original concept behind Google Street View and e-ink displays. Ito's selection was reported in the media at the time as an unusual choice, given his lack of experience in education or even a college degree. But Ito was successful in his position at the Media Lab, steering the ship for one of America's most high-profile tech incubators, and raking millions and millions of dollars in donations. He also grew his public profile through a range of media appearances and contributions to newspapers and magazines like Wired and the New York Times. He even had an interview with then-President Barack Obama in 2016. Ito was essentially something of a tech rock star. He was a deeply connected Silicon Valley investor, a TED Talk speaker, and a social media influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers online. But that all pretty suddenly came to an end in 2019, however, when the New Yorker published an investigative piece exposing Ito's connections to Epstein and the fact that he concealed nearly $1 million in contributions from Epstein to the MIT lab, and millions more through donations brokered by the sex offender and financier. Ito also received at least $1.2 million from Epstein for an investment fund separate from MIT that Ito controlled. According to the New Yorker, Epstein, who was convicted of child prostitution in 2008, had been disqualified from donating to MIT. However, Ito, who's acknowledged that he met Epstein at a conference in 2013, managed to secure contributions from him, going to significant lengths to conceal their contact with one another and by documenting Epstein's donations as anonymous. Through emails, documents, and interviews with staffers, it was revealed that many employees were explicitly aware of who Epstein was and were directed by Ito to help cover up connections to him. It was also discovered that Epstein was consulted on how to use the funds, visited MIT on at least one occasion, and was so well known at the lab that members there started referring to him as Voldemort. Less than a day after the New Yorker report was released, Ito resigned from his position at MIT, and soon after, he also stepped down from positions at Harvard, the New York Times, and multiple foundations. I should note, however, that Ito's denied wrongdoing and claimed that he consulted with higher-ups at MIT and decided to document Epstein's donations as anonymous to avoid helping rehabilitate his image. Ito's also denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes or misconduct. In the closest thing to a rationale for why he cultivated Epstein as a donor and accepted large amounts of money from both Epstein himself and Epstein-linked funds and donors, Ito said in a blog post that Epstein had finished serving his sentence in 2009. He had returned to public life and was supporting researchers at American universities. But with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's total endowment being $16.9 billion in 2019, it's hard to explain why it wouldn't be more selective in terms of who it accepts money from. So while Ito avoided any criminal prosecution over the whole Epstein donations debacle, his reputation and public profile in the US was severely damaged, and he soon packed up and left America, returning to Japan. But once Ito got back to his home country, he didn't stay on the sidelines for long, because in 2021, he began working at the Chiba Institute of Technology, and in 2023, he became the university's president. In a statement, the university acknowledged the circumstances surrounding Ito, but said it had reviewed the results of an investigation conducted at MIT and decided it would stand by him. His growing influence in Japan wasn't limited to academia, however. In 2021, the same year he began working at the Chiba Institute of Technology, Ito was appointed to a council within Japan's digital agency, a government office tasked with promoting technology and the digitalization of public functions. More notably, however, he was also quietly tapped to help with Japan's Global Startup Campus Initiative, a government effort to establish a tech incubator with backing from Japanese and American universities and entrepreneurs. When questioned on Ito's involvement in the project, government officials have outwardly said that, quote, he is merely acting as a part-time advisor. And while his exact role is somewhat unclear, the New York Times has reported that he's actually a critical part of it. The Times found that an internal memo named Ito as one of the project's 3 leaders. Possible partners have been told that he plays a pivotal role, and documents credit him alone with developing the project's overarching framework. While the project was started by one of Takaichi Sanae's predecessors, and Ito was installed before she took over as prime minister, he was apparently brought on, or at least supported, by Amari Akira, a Liberal Democratic Party conservative stalwart and close ally of Takaichi's. And despite growing attention of Ito's role in pushback from key potential partners, including Harvard, Keio University, and Ito's old friends at MIT, who have all indicated that his involvement is a problem, neither the administrations of Takaichi nor former Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru made any attempt to remove him. So this whole situation and Ito's relationship with Epstein remains ambiguous. There's no evidence that Epstein received any quid pro quo from Ito over his donations, and it's unknown to what extent Ito knew about Epstein's crimes. Ito himself has denied having any knowledge of Epstein's abuse, so for all we know, Epstein was donating to MIT out of the goodness of his heart, and that's where their relationship ended. And while this episode with Epstein may cloud Ito's past, he's largely been able to move on from it. Wait, what? Ito's all over the latest batch of the Epstein files? So, the slow drip of the files has caught up with Ito. And the latest included thousands of emails and messages exchanged between Ito and Epstein, as well as records of multiple trips by Ito to Epstein's island, and even more information on problematic financial dealings. I've been digging through the files, and the breadth of their conversations is staggering, making Ito one of Epstein's most prolific correspondents. Their discussions went far beyond MIT, often venturing into news, politics, and personal matters. Many of their messages discuss setting up phone or video calls. They also frequently spent time together, messaging or arranging meetings, or discussing them afterward, with Ito often telling Epstein he was on his way to one of his properties or a hotel where he was staying. When Ito's daughter was born, he joked about naming her Jeffrina, and Epstein appears to be one of the first people he informed, sending Epstein a photo in the middle of the night that shows Ito holding his newborn baby. And yes, Ito went to the island multiple times. So, while this hasn't absolutely spelled the end for Ito, the release of the files has once again put his relations with Epstein into the spotlight, and have already had consequences. Seemingly bowing to public pressure or possibly preempting his firing, Ito announced he would step down from his government positions at the end of the month, and he is also resigning from a business he co-founded. However, he remains the president of the Chiba Institute of Technology, and despite the attention in the US and the fact that he's resigning from at least some of his positions, the news surrounding Ito has received relatively little coverage in Japanese language media, with some news reports discussing the Epstein saga but failing to mention Ito entirely. So it's uncertain exactly what the future will hold for Joi Ito, if he'll slowly fade into obscurity once and for all, or if he's already planning his next act. I have to reiterate that Ito's never been charged with a crime, and has been accused of no specific wrongdoing apart from his effort to conceal the fundraising from Epstein. But the fact that he was a correspondent with one of the most infamous figures of the 21st century, seemingly a close personal friend, and literally visited the island, his assertions that he had no knowledge of Epstein's wrongdoings might be a tough sell. And it's hard to imagine that Ito's reputation emerges from this unscathed.
Yeah.